Om Jnana-timirandhasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadama Hyam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutapadakamanam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamsha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gora Tishe Namaha Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Okay, so today we are going to continue on from where we left off, which is the first half of chapter 4. Let me share my screen. Okay, and can you all see my screen? Is it showing it blown up, or is it showing it inside the software?
It's showing in the slide share, Prabhuji. Slide
okay.
share, yeah.
Okay, I'll have to give me a second. I'll change how our screen sharing. Okay, now can you see it filling up the screen?
Yes, Prabhuji, we can see it filling up the screen.
Jai. Oh, it's nice to see you back, Srinivas Prabhu. We missed you. I missed you, at least. I'm sure everyone else has as well.
I also missed all the association, Prabhuji. So yes. I went to India. So I'm back last week, Prabhuji.
Hope you went for good reasons only.
Yes, Prabhuji.
Nothing sad happened. Lots of people go to India for sad reasons, right? Okay.
No. Not because of that. I just want to see my parents.
Best reasons. I hope you enjoyed.
Yes, Prabhuji.
Jai. Well,
I got COVID over there, but I'm recovered from there.
You got COVID?
Yes, Prabhuji.
Oh, yeah. Not too nectar.
But still all right. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. So, Bhagavad-Gītā, chapter 4. So I won't revise what we did last week too much, just because we only touched on the first few texts. But there was a few things we did touch on. So, which we will bring up here. As we know, there was the question of transcendental knowledge, because transcendental knowledge was mentioned by Krishna. This is the means by which we overcome lust. And so knowledge becomes a question, right? You don't bring something up and then not define it. And that's the concern which is answered in the 4th chapter. So Krishna, he begins by describing how this knowledge is attained. And this is what we find in the beginning parts of chapter 4. He describes the parampara, and as we all did last week, he describes it in a very confusing way, right? He speaks, even though he appears to be only 100 or so years old, right? And by visual appearance, he appears even younger. We know that Krishna, he never seems older than a youthful boy, right? But yet he's speaking about having spoken this millions and millions of years ago. So intentionally, he's done this in order to confuse Arjuna, right? And not just to confuse Arjuna, but also to give an opportunity for Arjuna to ask the question regarding the nature of himself. So what we find then is Arjuna, he does ask a question, right? And he asked the question of how could you have spoken this? And that, of course, will begin the latter half. But before we came to that, we discussed the nature of the parampara. Who can tell me, what does parampara mean? What is the literal meaning of this word parampara? Can anyone say? Oh, I have a chance. Above, yes. Yes, that's one way to render it.
The lineage, Prabhu.
Yes, the lineage, that's another way to render it.
Disciplic succession.
Yes, disciplic succession, that's another way. The one that
Tradition?
yes, that's another way. So I'm not saying all of these are correct, but that's the sorry.
It means
Top. So para, I don't know, like it's a top.
Yeah.
Coming from.
it means
We can say it means one after the other, right? That's all of the definitions you all gave are valid. This is the thing with Sanskrit words. If you say one word, you can cut it up in 50 million ways, right? So all of you gave correct answers, but we could, for this purpose, I want to think of it as one after the other. Now, Śrikānta Sena Prabhu has written something very interesting. He said uninterrupted, and we will discuss that now. So
does it mean Prabhuji not
yes.
deviated through parampara system?
Yes, it can also mean this, right? So this is implied by one after the other, right? Parampara means, one second. Okay, there we go. Parampara means one after the other. It is successive, right? So there is also the idea, and then we get those other ideas. So very literally, it means one after the other. And what is that? That is tradition. But what type of tradition are we speaking about? One of disciples. So it's a disciplic succession, right? So all of these meanings are correct, right? So this word parampara is very central. And as we discussed last week, there are 4 central paramparas, right? There are 4 sampradayas, if you will. Now we're going to hear lots of terminology thrown around, right? A sampradaya is one of the 4 lineages, right? I don't have a slide for them, but who can remember, because we were discussing it last week? Who can tell me what are the 4 sampradayas, the 4 lines? They're coming from who?
One is Brahma Sampradaya.
Yes.
And we are actually coming from the Brahma Madhva Gaudiya Sampradaya.
Yes.
And second one is Sri Sampradaya.
Yes.
And Rudra Sampradaya.
Yes.
And the 4th one is Kumara or Nimbarkar Sampradaya.
Yes. Yeah. Very good. So those are the 4. And this is extra brownie points now. Can anyone remember who are the main acharyas for each one of these 4 lines?
So Prabhu, it's Ramanujacharya for the Sri Sampradaya.
Yep.
It's for the Rudra Sampradaya, it's Vallabhacharya.
No. So that's a complex. We were discussing this last week. So
Yes, I remember.
Technically, it's Vishnu Swami.
Vishnu Swami. Yeah.
Vallabhacharya, he comes later on, but because of all of the other Vishnu Swami lines, they die out a bit, right? So Vallabhacharya, he's the main acharya of the remainder of the Rudra Sampradaya. So Vallabhacharya also, he's very much connected to it, right? In the same way that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is very much connected to the Madhva Sampradaya, even though he's not the first in the, the first grand acharya in the line, so to speak.
Yes.
Yes. So very good. And then, so we've got one left.
Madhvacharya.
Pardon? No.
And then it was Kumara Sampradaya.
Yes.
I've rushed it. Bring.
Yes, no, they're the one everyone forgets. Everyone forgets the Nimbarka Sampradaya as acharya.
Nimbarka.
Yes, yeah. Nimbarka or Nimbaditya. Okay, so these are all historical details. Today, we will be discussing a bit of history. So if you don't like history, sorry. Parampara is about the disciplic succession. So we will be talking about history a tiny bit. But before we get to the history, we'll do the philosophy first, and then we'll discuss history. So I'll tell you when you can all start napping. Okay, so our parampara, however, is listed in a very different and unique way. And that's why I've titled this slide, the Bhagavat Parampara. because our parampara is not listed. The one that we have is not listed in the way that the paramparas normally are. Traditionally, what would happen when one received initiation in our line, right? Because as we described last week, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he comes, and so we have a splinter, if you will, in the Madhva line. So we have Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's line, and then we have the regular Tattvavadis, right? If you will, the other followers of Madhvacharya who did not accept Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So with this division here, we find our own line. And this line has been going on for a while. And traditionally, what would happen is at the time of initiation, what would happen? Well, and when I say traditionally, that's just the system that was around at the time of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada. Does everyone know what list of names were given? You'd be given a list of names when you're initiated. Does anyone know then what the system would be like? It's all right if you don't. This is maybe some more historical details now.
No, Prabhuji.
Okay, so what happened is at the time of your initiation, there would be a thing called Siddha Pranali. We will discuss this later. Siddha Pranali will come up with Nectar of Devotion. And so the Guru, he would tell you, your form, you are so-and-so Manjari. This is your form in the spiritual world. You are so-and-so, they would never really say Gopal. It would always be a Manjari form, they would say, right? This is your name, these are your qualities. And here is a list of my Diksha Guru. This is the Guru who initiated me. And this is his form in the spiritual world that he was given by his Guru. And then he would say, and this is my Guru's form. And they would do like that in lines of the initiation all the way back to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. This is the way that it was done traditionally. Now, you might notice something. We do not list all the Manjari forms of the Acharyas in our list. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, while he didn't reject the system, is a common myth in ISKCON circles that the Siddha Pranali system is rejected and it's bogus. It's not bogus. Bhaktivinoda Thakur accepted this system as a valid system. However, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said that this system was being abused, and therefore he minimized it. Our Acharyas also have said this is valid. I think there is strong evidence that our Acharyas did encourage this system. We can trace it all the way back to Dhyana Chandra Goswami, who was a disciple of the disciple of Gopal Bhatta Goswami, if I remember correctly. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur himself practiced this, right? So if Bhaktivinoda Thakur practiced it, well, I think we would be very risky to say then that it is a bogus innovation, right? But nevertheless, our Acharyas do say that all of this information can also be revealed through the holy name. And so this is a system that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur instead implemented, because what happened is at his time, people were just giving this out freely, not having much understanding, and they were just making it all very, very cheap. And so you'll find this. I know one devotee I know, he got initiated in one of these lines, and the lines aren't necessarily bogus, but he was given his form and he's told, you are so-and-so Manjari, you are this many years and this many days old, you know, your best friend is so-and-so, like this he was told. And then he got disillusioned, right? He thought, I don't really want to practice anymore, right? And then he decided to come back to Krishna consciousness. And so he went, and now he found a new Guru in that line. And he was expecting, when he was speaking to that Guru, to be told, oh, well, this is your name. These are all your details. And he got told all completely different details, right? Because actually neither Guru had the qualification actually to share these details, because they didn't know, they were just making it up. So he got just told some other random set of details. So stuff like this was happening. But we will find something even more significant and something even more, different than that traditional system, okay? And we'll find this. I will ask you all, does everyone know who is the initiating Guru of Srila Prabhupada? Who can tell me? This is not a trick question.
This is right for Bhaktisiddhanta.
Bhaktisiddhanta says.
Yes. So the initiating Guru of Srila Prabhupada is Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Okay. Who is the initiating Guru of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur? Who can tell me?
Gaur Kishore Das Babaji.
Yes, Gaur Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj. So we've got the idea of the rhythm. Who can tell me then, who is the initiating guru of Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur?
Narottam Das.
Yes, that's what we would think, right? We would think it is Narottama Das Thakur, but it is not. The initiating guru, so don't worry, I was being very cruel. I walked you into that. So I was happy you gave that response. That was the response I was expecting, because that's what we would expect. But Narottam Das Thakur's initiating guru, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's initiating guru is not Narottam Das Thakur. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is initiated by Radharaman Goswami, who is Baladev Vidyabhushan initiated by. It's not Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. Baladev Vidyabhushan, he is initiated by Radha Damodar Goswami. Who then is the initiating guru of Bhaktivinoda Thakur? Does anyone want to guess? It's Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj? It's not.
Yes.
Is
No.
not. Is Bipin Bihari Goswami. And who is the initiating guru of Gaur Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj? Well, everyone's going to be too afraid to answer now. It's not Bhaktivinoda Thakur, right? And let's complicate this some more. At certain points in here, there are gaps of 4 generations, right? Krishnadas Kaviraj Thakur, he knew the Goswamis here, Rupa, Sanatan, Raghunath, Jiva. He knew all of them. But in between Krishnadas Kaviraj Thakur and Bhaktivinoda Thakur, there are very many years. And there are not just 3 personalities separating them, right? So it's not just that each person in the line didn't necessarily initiate the further one, but it's that some of them didn't even know each other. Now it's getting maybe a little bit complex, right? This is maybe not what we would expect from a disciplic succession, right? Because we very much have this culture in ISKCON today, and it's unfortunately an incorrect culture, right? That the parampara is carried on how? By initiation, and everyone goes, ooh, I am initiated, right? This is what my mother says. Devotees are humble until they stop being called bhakta something. That's when devotees really lose their humility, when they get the das at the end of their name, right? When they become so and so das, then the humility is gone. So she always says, she's very encouraging. Yes. She says she's always very encouraging to bhakta so and so, but she's always very heavy to so and so das, because that's when you start thinking, oh, look at me, I am in the parampara line, I am link 33 in the disciplic succession, right? So all of this starts creeping in, because this is this culture we have, right? Because we are very much attached to the externals, right? We are very much attached, but this is not actually how we draw our line. Link 33, yeah. We do not draw our line in this way. Instead, when asked, right, about our parampara, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, he wrote a bhajan called Sri Guru Parampara, and I will send a link to it in the WhatsApp group. It's a very sweet bhajan. It's a Bengali one. It's sung to the tune of Sri Guru Charana Padma, right? And in this line, we find all of this, right? Confusion, things are jumping around everywhere, you're right? Not what we would expect. And in fact, traditionally, within our Sampradaya, within our lineage of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, within it, you would ask, which parivar are you in? We all know the word parivar, right? It means family. So there's many families within our line. And each family associated themselves with a different associate of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And still today, if you see the lines, if you see the different lines, they will all say, so you will ask, oh, which parivar are you in? And they'll say, oh, I'm in the parivar of, they'll say, I'm in the parivar of Nityananda Prabhu, right? Or I'm in the Dvaita Acharya parivar. Or I'm in all like this, right? I'm in the Gadadhar Pandit Parivar, right? I'm in the family of this associate, that associate, right? And when Srila Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, when he was asked which parivar we're in, and we are in a parivar, right, by initiation. But do you know, does anyone know which parivar Srila Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur said we are in?
Lord Chaitanya?
Sorry?
Chaitanya, Prabhu, like
That would make sense, right? Because he's trying to come to the essence. But no, what he says is, he says we are in the parivar of Bhakti-Vinod Thakur. But Bhakti-Vinod Thakur, he's all the way down here. Everyone else traces their parivar up here. But Srila Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he traces this here. And this is a very essential element of how our parampara works. Because our parampara is very, how do you put it? It's very edgy, actually. It's very intentionally playing around with the expectations that people had. It's very much trying to push back against certain conceptions. And doing so, it comes to what the heart of the parampara is. So I'm going to touch on the heart of the nature of our parampara, and then I'm going to discuss the individual links just shortly. I'll give a short overview of how our parampara flows through history. Okay, because often people will hear the parampara, right? And we all get the idea. It's the knowledge passing down through all of these links, right? And people will hear it and they will think this is some very oppressive thing, right? It's very oppressive. Oh, the parampara, I have to, I'm forced to believe what somebody else has said. I can't think for myself, right? Sometimes people feel like this, and I don't want to mock that feeling because I think I can understand why people feel that way. And often people do practice the parampara system like that. But that is not what the parampara is. The parampara, I would say, is quite the opposite. So before that, I want to use one example, right? One example of a personality who very much, I think, embodies this parampara, and he's also the person who wrote it. And that is Srila Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Because what have we mentioned in the parampara? Who can remember? I asked this as the question last week. What is it? What is it that destroyed, that caused the line, the disciplic succession to apparently fade away?
Influence of the time, Prabhuji. Influence
of time, right? Kale neha, right? And what does Krishna say? Kalosmi, I am time. So this parampara, it comes and it goes, and it comes and it goes under the influence of time. But who is in control of time? It is Krishna. So this parampara, it is very much controlled by Krishna, but it is not just controlled by Krishna in the sense that, oh, it just keeps on going and going and going. Krishna sometimes pulls it back, and sometimes he'll let it flow, right? The parampara's flow is really maintained by Krishna throughout history. And we'll find this is for good reason, right? Sometimes the parampara needs to go into a bit of a difficult situation in order for there to arise renewal, right? Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, who we will look into deeper in a few minutes, he did all of his renewals of the parampara system. Why? Because it was being abused, right? Because the traditional system had fallen into issue. So when there is decay, then there is time for renewal. So Krishna, we can say, Krishna allows the decay to happen in order for renewal to be breathed into the system. We find the same thing with the Bhagavad-Gītā. The whole Bhagavad-Gītā is being spoken, right? So wonderfully by Krishna himself in a way that is very relevant to us, right? It's spoken for us as souls. We are in Kali Yuga, and Bhagavad-Gītā was spoken just before Kali Yuga began, right? So spoken so relevantly for us, right? Why? Because yogo nashta parantapa, right? Because this line is appeared to have been lost. So in this way, we find the parampara as a very controlled flow. And sometimes it is pulled back and sometimes it is unleashed out, all relevant to how Krishna wants the knowledge to be manifest. Because again, what is the nature of the parampara? It is not something restrictive. We always think of the parampara as what? When somebody says, follow the parampara system, what do we think, right? What do we think? Maybe Rohan Prabhu. When somebody says, what you're doing, you are not following parampara, what connotation does that bring up to your mind?
I think that like each acharya, they impose certain rules, but according to time, the rules can be changed according to time, place, and circumstance. So it's not a rigid structure, but there is change according to what the acharya thinks is best for his disciples and the people at the time.
Yes, absolutely, for sure. And so then when somebody, so then knowing this, right? Even though we know this, how often do we find in ISKCON, if you're doing something and somebody says, oh, you're not following parampara system, what do we think? What do we think that person is telling us?
Not following the culture?
Yes, we think that. We think, oh, this person is saying we are not following what has been given to us, right? But this is not just the nature of the parampara system. And if we think of this as the only nature of the parampara, then the parampara is very restrictive, right? The parampara is very restrictive when we think the parampara is about us receiving. It is about us receiving, but it is also about us giving. So the parampara is not just that we receive the torch. It's like a marathon, right? You know, I think the Olympics somewhere started. I was seeing every time an Olympics start, there's always some protest from someone who doesn't like the government of the country that's hosting it, right? That's the only reason why I know there's some Olympics happening. And what do, right? There's a relay race, right? When they run with the flame and they give the torch, right? They give the torch to light the Olympic fire. We all know this tradition, right? In the Olympics, right? The Olympic flame gets passed along. If somebody runs with that Olympic flame and he passes it to the person next to him, and that person doesn't run, right? He just says, okay, I've received the flame. Has he successfully done anything? No, he hasn't, right? He's messed up the whole Olympics. However many $1 trillion they could have been spent doing anything else down the drain. So, so like this, we find this is the nature of the parampara. That fire of transcendental knowledge is passed down from one link to the other, right? And then it's passed down to all of us. But what is the nature of parampara knowledge? It is one after the other. Just as much as we receive, we should give. This is the nature of parampara. Not that we should drum up and act like an acharya, right? Not that we should think of ourselves as great gurus, but naturally, there are gaps in the line, right? Why are there gaps? Because there are still people carrying this knowledge on, right? Maybe they're not listed also, largely, right? But still, this knowledge is carried on. And in some way or another, all of us act as gurus. We should not think we don't. Yeah, no. Who's next in the line? So this is the line we use in ISKCON because now everyone is under different spiritual masters and the lines will go differently, right? It's like actually the original line that was given ended with Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, right? Srila Prabhupada's name wasn't there. So if you go to Gopinath Gauriamat, they don't have A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada there. They'll have Bhakti Pramod Puri Goswami there, right? So this is the nature of the parampara. It's a tree, right? Prabhupada even writes this in Chaitanya Charitamrita. He says the Gauriya Vaishnavism is a beautiful tree, right? And they're all the different branches. And ISKCON is one branch coming out of Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, right? So as it branches out, the different links will be different for different people, right? But anyways, but in another sense, it's you, right? You are the current link, Varun Prabhu, right? All of us in many ways, to whatever way we are channeling the parampara, we are the current link, right? And as the current link, we can't innovate in the way the great acharyas did, but we also should innovate to some degree because that is the mood of the previous acharyas. They weren't just there, right? Traditional Vaishnavism sometimes is said, right? There's a group of people who will say, oh, we follow traditional Gauriya Vaishnavism. But traditional Gauriya Vaishnavism is the idea that there is no tradition because traditionally we have always changed the tradition, right? At the heart, there is Krishna, Kirtan, and Mahaprabhu. But so many other things, they are changed and modified as we go along. And again, I said in a few minutes, but now I'm focusing on this point for a bit. as we'll find in the lifetime of Srila Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, sometimes those changes can be drastic. And it's not necessarily in our hands to make such drastic changes, but it is in our hands to be intelligent, to be creative, to be free in the way that we apply Krishna consciousness, in the ways that we preach it, right? Some devotees, sometimes they'll get this idea that if we do everything 100% exactly the same way Srila Prabhupada did it in the 1960s and 1970s, then we'll have full success. But the problem with that isn't that we shouldn't follow Prabhupada, but that we aren't in the 1960s and 1970s anymore. And Prabhupada, he was not a fan of this blind following, right? And sometimes because it's easy to become a fundamentalist, or it's easy to just do exactly everything with every single detail the same as we heard before, right? But then we're no longer actually receiving what is given to us, because what is given to us is a dynamic and living thing. And we turn it into something very, very dull and stale. There's one pastime once, Srila Prabhupada, he was walking on a morning walk with some of his disciples, and this big car, it drove past them. And Srila Prabhupada said, one day we will have a large car like this and we will use it for Krishna. And all of his disciples went, Jai, right? And then they walked past this really beautiful house, and Srila Prabhupada said, and we will have big, beautiful houses like this, and we will use it for Krishna. And all his disciples went, Jai. And then one guard dog, big, beautiful guard dog, came up and began to start barking. And Srila Prabhupada said, and we will one day have a big, beautiful dog like this, and we will use it for Krishna. And all his disciples went, Jai. And then Srila Prabhupada, he turned around and he said, what use do we have for a big dog? Use your intelligence. Don't just say Jai blindly. Use your intelligence and think about what I'm saying, right? So Srila Prabhupada, he very much emphasized this, and this is an emphasis that we can lose. I'm not saying anything controversial here, even though it might feel that way, right? But actually, we're meant to think about what we receive in the Parampara. We're meant to think not only what is the essence, right? But also we should think, how can I give this essence to others, right? This is the nature of Parampara. And then we can think intelligently. The Parampara is a dynamic thing. It is not a dead thing, right? So sometimes people will, sometimes people will feel, oh, we're just blindly accepting. We're not. If you blindly accept, you're not following the Parampara, because the knowledge that is being given by the Parampara is not one that asks to be blindly accepted. And not only that, we can wrangle with it, we can wrestle with it. It is understood in so many different ways. We can be, again, creative. This is one issue I've sometimes heard with how Bhakti-śāstrī is often studied. Often we do Bhakti-śāstrī and we memorize some facts and we memorize all of these details, and then we go ahead with we've got our Bhakti-śāstrī degree. And that's fine if you want to do that. I won't hold it against you. But really, we should be creative. We should be trying to connect this information. We should be trying to understand it very deeply, not just retaining the details and the facts and the shlokas, but we should try to understand, what is this message that is given, right? And we should think creatively. Each line in not even just in our Parampara, if we look at so many disciples of Srila Prabhupada, right? How deep their realizations are as they're trying to be creative. Devotees are meant to be creative, and we should also be creative with the philosophy, not speculative, but creative. And this is now why I say that the Parampara is so freeing, right? It's so freeing because the Parampara allows us to be creative without speculative, right? The Parampara gives us the guidelines, right, of which things are essential and which things are not. And therefore, we are given the ultimate freedom, right? We are given true freedom because we can freely say, in this area, I can be creative here, right? And in this area, maybe I'll not be so creative. When you're given full authority to do whatever, right? Then maybe you will lose the benefit, right? And you will also doubt yourself, right? You will doubt, am I here cutting away at the essence of it, right? But with the Parampara system, we are beautifully given the essence, and therefore we are able to truly embrace our creativity, right? Both in our thinking and in our preaching and in our study and in our practice. And therefore, the Bhagavad Parampara, it flows like this. Why is it called the Bhagavad Parampara? Because it's a dynamic parampara of the knowledge of Srimad Bhagavatam being passed down, right? And each one of these personalities, they are Bhagavat themselves, the Bhagavatam personified, okay? So like this, we find all of them dynamically moving. So we are in, yes, as Śrikānta Sena Dāsa said. So I'm going to go now and use the example of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, there's so much that can be said about him, but I'm going to discuss a few things in his lifetime about how this embodies our mood of the Bhagavad Parampara. These are two photos of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Here we find one, this is, to my knowledge, this photo on the left is prior to sannyas. And then we have this photo on the right, which is after he took sannyas. As maybe some of us might know, he was the first sannyasi in our line since Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, right? At least in our parampara list, no one really took sannyas. Everyone took the clothes of a Babaji, right? And so this was tradition. Everyone, when you became renounced, you cut off your Brahmin's thread, you threw it away, and then you wore white clothes, right? You wore a white lungi, right? You grew your beard out, and then you did your bhajan, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur himself created Babajis. However, at the time, because as we described, there were very many terrible things. If I describe them in full details, we would maybe find it distasteful. Some people, some Sahajiyas, what they would do is they would sleep with all their disciples, and they would say, I am Krishna and you are the gopis, right? And then they would do like these terrible things. And then if the disciples became pregnant, they would just kill the child, right? That's the culture that was happening at the time. So what happened because of this, people, they saw the Babajis, and even though there are valid Babajis, again, like the Siddha Pranali thing, sometimes in ISKCON we get fanatical. Babajis are bogus. They're not bogus at all. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur himself, he said of Vamsidas Babaji Maharaj, he said he is so elevated, he told all of his disciples not to associate with him, because he said he is so elevated, you will not be able to understand him. He is beyond anything you will ever understand, right? So it is not that they're all bogus, but there was enough abuses. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, what did he do? And because he realized that sannyas, right? Sannyasis were very well respected at the time, even though Babajis weren't. He decided to take sannyas in order to reflect the dignity in the lines, right? And he also did many other dynamic things. He started giving the Brahmin's thread, right? Brahminical initiation to all disciples from any family background, because what else was happening? There was all these caste system abuses, right? Sometimes as devotees, we will want to get touchy-feely and say, oh, you know, caste system abuses are exaggerated. I sometimes hear that, right? But I don't think they were exaggerated. I think they were pretty bad, right? The historical record is rather clear about that. And so are our acharyas. Why would Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur want to protest against the system if it wasn't that bad, right? We have to think a little rationally, right? So it was that bad. And so he spoke out against it by giving any of his disciples second initiation. And this caused big issue. And even further than that, what he did, there's one article you can find he wrote, and he said, my true disciple, they will marry from different jatis, from different backgrounds, right? My disciple who is willing and brave to marry from different jatis, to mix all the jatis up, right? He said, he is really taking my mission seriously, right? To reject and to protest against the rigid abuses that have come up in this system. So this is very dynamic, right? It's very much rejecting things. Also before the Babajis, they would become upset. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, you know what he was? He was completely in Maya. You know why? Because he had a watch. Because they would say wearing a watch, this is too much luxury, right? But Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he's making the point. Renunciation is what? Renunciation is using everything for Krishna, not denying yourself. And this we find in the Bhagavad-Gītā. The Bhagavad-Gītā is not about repression. It is not about suppression. It is about finding Krishna in everything, right? So he's coming again to the essence, right? Sometimes it's said that our parampara is not a parampara of bodies, but a parampara of the Bhagavatam, right? It's not just simply this. Okay, and then we will find even, this is an example. Here we'll find, does everyone know, everyone knows who this personality is, right? This is Srila Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And here he is. This was the governor of Bengal at the time, right? He was the British governor of Bengal. Does anyone know who these two on the left are? These two, they are sannyasi disciples of Srila Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, right? I think one of them is Bon Maharaj, and I've forgotten the name of the other. If you are into history, you can research and find out who they are. I know there's a clear record of who they are, but I've just forgotten right now, right? So there is now the we find here Srila Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur. He's welcoming the governor because he would do this often in order to get resources and facilities available to the Gauriya Math, right? We all know Srila Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, his mission was the Gauriya Math, which no longer exists today. Today, some devotees, they'll say, oh, he's a Gauriya Math devotee. But actually, Gauriya Math doesn't exist anymore. Gauriya Math dissolved after Srila Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur. There's many Gauriya Maths, like groups that have followed from Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, but there is no the Gauriya Math anymore. When we say he's from Gauriya Math, we will mean he's from one of the groups that came after the Gauriya Math, right? And it gets confusing because many of them will name themselves after the Gauriya Math. Not all of them, but many of them do. So that's why we think it's the original Gauriya Math, but it's not. The original Gauriya Math doesn't exist anymore. So you have like Gopinath Gauriya Math, Sri Chaitanya Gauriya Math, like that. Okay, but what's interesting here is, see, Srila Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, he had his sannyas disciples. What are they dressed at? They're not dressed as sannyasis. They're dressed like priests, right? They're dressed like priests. So he had them dress in this way because he wanted to dynamically preach, right? He wanted to dynamically represent Krishna consciousness, right? The externals weren't the question for him, right? In fact, we find that there's some historical record that at one point, Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, his sannyasis would dress a little bit differently. They would dress in a different color. But what he found is that people most appreciated the saffron. So he adopted saffron because that was the one that was most appreciated by people. And today in ISKCON, if somebody were to even change the color, like the shade of saffron, people would throw up their hands and say, here is an innovator, you know, he is destroying our parampara. But what is our parampara, right? Our parampara is is a dynamic one. The only constant thing in our parampara is change. Change is the only thing that doesn't change in our parampara, right? Everything is constantly dynamically moving, right? So the Bhagavat Parampara is very much freed up, and we come in this parampara, so we should embody this move. It is freed up to be relevant, to change when the moment needed it, right? And here we find it's not just Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, but he's also engaging his disciples in this way. And so we will find that the Bhagavat Parampara, sometimes it can be confusing, right? Sometimes it can be, we'll find if you read any history book of different acharyas, you'll be confused. Oh, this is so different. They're doing this different, that different, right? But this is the nature, because who is the head of the parampara? Who is the head of all paramparas? Who can tell me? Who is in charge of all paramparas?
Krishna.
Krishna. So what does Krishna like to do? What is the nature of Krishna?
He's the master of time. He decays and then he regenerates and he does what he does.
Yes, and absolutely, that's him as supreme controller. But when Krishna, he's just hanging out, right? What does Krishna, at his most essence, when is Krishna most Krishna? When Krishna can do whatever he wants, what does he do?
Mischief.
Yes, mischief. That's definitely one. And what's the grand mischief that he does is dancing, right?
Yeah.
So we have this Krishna, right? Krishna, he is not a teacher, he is a dancer, right? And so what is dance? Dance is a dynamically moving thing. Each step of a dance is new, right? Dancing is this very fresh thing, right? And dancing is changing. The dance is always there, but the movements of it, they're always changing. And we experience this in kirtans, right? All of us have been to a kirtan, right? Sometimes the kirtan, it speeds up and, you know, and then it's barely even dancing anymore. You know, it's just chaos, right? And then other times it slows down so much, everyone's sitting down and, you know, they're closing their eyes and I always worry that they're falling asleep. But like this, right? So there's a whole variety, right? But all of this is happening back and forth. Krishna, he is a dancer. And so the parampara, naturally it changes and it moves. Why? Because it matches the dancing of Krishna. As I said, time factor, right? And as Tarun Prabhu nicely pointed out, the time factor is in control of the parampara. The time factor controls when it comes and when it goes, and Krishna is the time factor, and Krishna is a dancer. And so the parampara, we can say each link in the parampara is a different footprint that Krishna leaves in history as he dances throughout history. As Krishna dances throughout history, and as he spreads out his kirtan and Krishna consciousness, how does he do it? He does it by leaving this trail of his dance. And that dance is the parampara. That is the way that Krishna acts himself out throughout history. So the parampara is very important for us to learn. It is very important for us to understand. When we study this parampara, we understand something. What are the rhythms of Krishna's dancing? What is the tune he plays with his flute, right? And when we see it all together, when we study the parampara, then we can identify not what is each individual step, right? If you learn only one step in a dance, you'll look like I was going to say probably a word I shouldn't say, like an idiot, right? You'll look like an idiot if you only take one step in a dance, right? If you only take one step, you'll just be taking that one step again and again and again. You're not dancing, right? You're just taking one step. But when we study the entirety of the parampara, we'll be able to see, oh, what is the central dance, right? What is the central dance that they're acting out? Tarun Prabhu, you are asking something?
Oh, no, Prabhuji. Like one step I was saying is acting like a robot.
Yes, like a robot, right? Yeah, exactly, right? So this is the nature of our parampara. It's a dance. And not only is Krishna a dancer, but he's also a bit of a clown, right? He also likes to play around and joke around, right? So we find all sorts of variations. And now, because of that, and I'll come to my final point here, and then we'll take a 5-minute break. I'm sorry, this is maybe very heavy philosophy, but it's very important, right? Chapter 4, I say, chapter 4, the beginning, has the most important philosophy that we can learn. Because if we understand this system, our Krishna consciousness will be stable. Too often, people will get upset if you say a different Mangala Charan before Bhagavatam class. I've heard people say, if you add Nama Shreshtam Manumapi Sachiputra Matra Swarupam, that's a very popular one. Or if you add this or that, people will say, oh, that's not how it was done when I joined ISKCON, right? Well, nothing is the same, right? It's always changing, and often it's changing for the worse, right? I'm not saying change is good for change's sake. That is why we must study Bhakti-śāstrī. That is why we must study the teachings of our acharyas, so we can find out what is the dance of Krishna and how can we help that dance carry forward into history, right? Yes, exactly. So, and that's a very good example. I'll share it for everyone. When the Roman Catholic Church had the Second Vatican Council, they said, we are not changing the faith. We are simply opening the windows to let a breath of fresh air in. So the idea of the parampara is every generation, we are constantly letting fresh air in. Every generation, we are constantly letting fresh air in. And sometimes that means there are contradictions, right? And this is the point I'll finish on before we have our break. Sometimes it means there are contradictions. We should not be upset that there are contradictions. And there are contradictions, right? And I was mentioning this last week. There are definitely contradictions. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, does anyone know what Bhaktivinoda Thakur said about harmonium playing? He didn't like it, right? Sorry? didn't like it, right? No. He said it's for people with little intelligence. he said it's for the less intelligent people. And he said all kirtans should just have mridanga and kartals. That's what he said. But what do we find? Srila Prabhupada, he comes and he uses the harmonium in the most perfect way, right? We might say this is a small difference. Let's take a look at another difference. Gaur Kishore Das Babaji, the guru of Bhakti-śāstrī Saraswati Thakur. You know what he instructed his disciples? He told his disciples, don't go to Kolkata. Kolkata is hell on earth. That's what he said. But who knows, where did Bhakti-śāstrī Saraswati Thakur begin the Gauriya Math? He began it in Kolkata, right? So we find things like this. I mean, forget about harmoniums. Now there's saxophones in Kirtan, right? If Bhaktivinoda Thakur didn't like the harmonium, what to speak then of the saxophone, right? But Srila Prabhupada, we find in general, he was relatively fine with all sorts of instruments being used. Now there's two things to understand with this. And then on that note, we will go on our break. Firstly, again, the essence is what stays the same. With Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he is taking the instruction of his spiritual master and he's fulfilling the essence of it. When one understands the essence fully, sometimes they will contradict the external aspects in order to keep the essence there, right? What is the essence of Gaur Kishore Das Babaji's message? The essence of his message is to preserve Krishna consciousness and to give Krishna consciousness to others. That was the essence of his message. And what was the essence of not going to Kolkata? Don't go to the big city and lose your Krishna consciousness, right? My mother, she also notes this. All of our relatives in India, they will maybe be relatively pious, and then they come to Sri Dham, Sydney, and instantly they're caught up in the rat race. You know, before they would not even eat onion and garlic, and now they'll start, eating all sorts of things, right? Maybe they'll drink every once in a while. I'm not saying this happens to everyone in Sydney, obviously, right? But we know this is the effect of the city, right? The city has that effect on people. It's the big bustling place. That's why, again, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said his grihastas have to have the strictest sadhana to protect them from the goings on, right? So his point was, do not become like a city-minded person, right? Because that is hell on earth, right? And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur did not. By founding the Gauriya Math, founding those temples, he established heaven on earth, right? In one sense, he never took step in Kolkata because every step he took was Goloka Vrindavan, right? But this is all coming to the very essence of things, right? And so it seems very contradictory to us, right? And another point is, sometimes we like to be Mayavadis with the Parampara. We want that everyone, when in the Parampara, all the realized souls, they are all just one same person, right? What do we know? People disagree, and even perfected people disagree, because that's what makes them individuals, right? That's what makes people individuals. In the spiritual world, people are disagreeing. There's the left-wing and right-wing gopis, not in the sense of politics. It's not that they're discussing who to vote for in the spiritual world, but they're just described in their approach to Krishna consciousness, right? And they disagree, right? And the cowherd boys, they disagree with Mother Jashoda. There's all these disagreements. Why? Because people are different and perfected people are different. And that's what makes perfected people perfect. The perfected personalities in the spiritual world aren't perfect because they're someone else. They're perfect because they're perfectly who they are, right? But we want some impersonalistic idea, right? Where everyone has the exact same feeling and sentiments and the exact same tastes. I remember I had this idea and I was so confused when devotees would say that Srila Prabhupada's favorite food item was kachori. I would think, how can this be? He should be having no preferences, right? But what is a personality without preferences, right? So once we understand this, we can understand, of course, there's going to be some contradictions in the Parampara because they're different individuals, right? And they have different preferences, they have different tastes. Gaur Govinda Maharaj, he would say, never put the peacock feather in Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's murti, right? But Srila Prabhupada, he said it's fine, right? You will find some variations like this. There are different personalities, right? But the essence is always the same. And then again, if we study it, we will realize maybe the essence of our line isn't wearing saffron and etc., 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 right? Maybe the essence of our line is simply, maybe the essence of our line is not at second initiation, you get Brahmin's thread and now you are acting as a Brahmin, right? Maybe the essence of our line is not all sorts of things that we've come to accept. Under Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, they sang different bhajans at the different arti times. Now, I'm not saying we need to change that. There's no real reason to do it, but that's not even the essence of our line, right? Before we have prasadam, what do we sing? Sharira or Viddo Jal, right? We sing that, right? But who wrote that? Bhaktivinoda Thakur wrote that. So what are we saying? Did all of the previous Vaishnavas sin because they didn't sing that before Bhaktivinoda Thakur wrote it, right? So not only do we have an opportunity to realize what is the essence, but also the things that we do observe, we can realize what is the essence that they are serving. If they are a detail that was introduced, what is the essence that they're observing? With singing that, I'm saying we should always sing that song, right? But that's by singing that song, why are we doing it? To fulfill the essence of honoring prasadam, which is there from the very beginning. We are not singing it because it's a special ritual that makes us suddenly cool to eat the prasad. We should sing it with the mood that we are honoring prasadam. We are realizing that when we eat prasad, we are eating the mercy of Krishna itself, right? That is why we sing it. And if we don't sing it with that in mind, then there's no point singing it, right? Because it's not some empty ritual. We are not concerned with empty rituals. We are not concerned with ritualism. We are not concerned, therefore, even with initiation. Devamrita Maharaj, I was hearing him speak at Śrikānta Sena Prabhu's initiation. And he said, it's a ritual, but it's a necessary ritual, right? I like that very much. That summarizes it. But even that we can set as secondary, right? It's an important thing to do. Initiation is so important, right? But even that is secondary, and that is the nature of our Bhagavad Parampara. Now coming back full circle, the nature of it is the essence, the speaking, the kirtan of Krishna, right? That is what is passing down, because the speaking of Bhagavatam is kirtan, right? The kirtan of Krishna, that is what is being passed down. That is the essence, and everything else is serving that. That is the essence. And if we don't do that, then we don't have any point, right? I once was hearing one class and there's a very deep realization. Even our study of these books is simply sense gratification if we do not do so in order to relish Krishna and in order to serve the devotees. It's simply sense gratification, collecting knowledge for the sake of knowledge, and there's nothing spiritual to it. But if we do this in order to drink in the qualities of Krishna, in order to serve the devotees, then we are fully tapping into that transcendental knowledge. Then we are acting in the parampara. Then we have received the parampara. That is how the parampara is received, not through initiation, not even through initiation, and definitely not through, people will say, I follow the 4 regulative principles, I'm chanting 16 rounds. These things are all good, but we should remember that they are details, they are not the principle. The goal of our society, if you ask somebody, what would your goal be for ISKCON? Some people might say, oh, I want everyone to be following the 4 regulative principles. That's good, but that's not the goal of ISKCON, right? Our goal is that everyone will fall in love with Krishna, right? That is the purpose of our society. And everything else is good and useful because it helps us do that. And sometimes there'll be some changes, there'll be some modifications, and that is obviously the prerogative of the parampara. Anyways, I did say we'll have our break soon, and we should have our break. So we're going to have our break now. Can somebody remind me, do I do the breaks for 5 minutes or 10 minutes? I've genuinely forgotten.
5 minutes, Prabhuji.
5 minutes,
5
okay.
minutes,
We'll have a 5-minute break then. I gave you guys a really long one last week then. Okay, 5-minute break. I'll see you all in 5 minutes. I'll see you all at 10 past 11. Okay, Hare Krishna. Okay, are there any questions just quickly? Because we're going through a lot of info. Today's class, I'm happy for people to really interject with questions. Okay, well, So there's not really a strict activity today. That's why I'm hoping people printed out that list, because I really wanted to annotate that list, because annotating that, I remember doing that when I was studying the Parampara history, and for me it really helped break it down, because otherwise it's this long list of names and it's so overwhelming, right? But when you're drawing on it, you can sort of like, you know, break it down into groups and bracket it off, and it becomes a little less overwhelming. Yeah, so we'll go through that. Was there anything that I needed to mention before we go on? Yeah, there's a few other points about Guru Tattva we can glean from the Parampara. The Parampara is just such a long topic, but I'm going to leave it for now so that we can keep going in this chapter. Yeah, so let's keep going. Oh, so just quickly, just quickly recap. So in summary, what do we think the essence of an initiation is? Or rather, what do we feel in ISKCON today? What in ISKCON today do we generally feel that people treat the essence of initiation as, right? When somebody says sorry?
No, sorry, I thought you were asking.
No, I am. What was it?
Just commitment to vows, like a formal commitment to vows.
Yeah, I'm gonna misspell commitment. I'm too sleep deprived for this. Commitment vows. Yep, that's good. What's something else that some people think of when we speak about initiation? What's the general thing that comes to our mind, right? Like culturally in ISKCON, what do we feel that it is? What,
like acceptance of one person as the guiding authority.
Yep. I think just once, Prabhu. Did you unmute as well?
Yes, Prabhu. I don't know. Maybe it's like a new birth, because during the initiation we get the spiritual name, right?
Yes, new name. Yes. Okay.
Being formally connected to Krishna and getting the mercy of the devotees.
Yes. Formal connection to Krishna. Mercy of devotees. Okay. Is anything else? Does anyone else have anything else? What comes up to your mind when we think of initiation? And when I say this isn't a right or wrong question. I'm more asking what the culture around us in our temples makes us think of. I'll add one that I often hear. Oh yeah, sorry. Please go.
Are you more responsible and more committed?
Yes. More responsibility. And there's also yagyas. Everyone talks about yagyas all the time, right? You get your yagya done, right? Men only? No. Traditionally, everyone gets initiated. The men only thing becomes an issue of who can give initiation, right? But which, okay, I don't want to be controversial, but I think anyone can give initiation, but which is also what the GBC has decided. But yeah, but there's some maybe discourse there, and I think there's validity on both sides. But yeah, but at least in terms of who can receive it, anyone can receive it. And in fact, our Diksha line, our Diksha line does not, but the Diksha line of Bhaktivinoda Thakur came from Janava Mata, right? Because we don't have the Diksha line, right? We have the line of teaching, not the line of initiation. But if you trace the line of Bhaktivinoda Thakur's Diksha Guru, and then that Diksha Guru, all the way back, you would get to Janava Mata, the consort of Nityananda Prabhu. So we even have in our line links. Yeah. So no, there's a bit of egalitarianism in bhakti, which comes and goes, unfortunately. Okay, so we find all of these things, and all of these things are good. But the essence of it is, in one sense, I would say, the formal connection to Krishna. However, I would say that it's the full essence of initiation happens in the sense that it is an actual connection to the parampara, right? So I would rephrase that a bit, right? Yes, there's the formality for the diksha, but the essence of initiation, the essence of all of it is when you are fully connected to the parampara. And I want to just give a few examples. Firstly, commitment of vows is very important. And again, I'm not correcting these. That's why I told you all, say what you feel in the culture around you. I'm just saying things that we culturally focus on a bit oddly, right? Commitment of vows is important, but I think Srila Prabhupada was the first to have the 4 regulative principles to be a vow, right? For initiation. Before him, you'd sort of just get initiated, right? I didn't vow the 4 vows when I got initiated. And I like to think my initiation was valid, right? So they're good, they're very important, but they're not essential, right? Same with the Yagyas, right? If you read in Brihad Bhagavatamrita, the initiation happens, there's no Yagya or anything. Just the speaking of some mantras into the ear, and then Gopakumar's on his own to travel the universe. Acceptance of one person. This is an interesting one, right? Actually, no, I'll go to new name first. New name. This is interesting, but we will find acharyas in our line who got given new names by different people who weren't their Diksha Guru, right? Being given new names happens often, actually. We don't have it so often now because we associate new name with initiation so much. People will go, oh, you've been reinitiated or something like that, right? But actually, no. Being given a new name is a common spiritual practice. I'm trying to think, is it Shamananda Charya? I think he was given a new name. Definitely Hriday Chaitanya. He used to be Hridayananda Das, and then he became Hriday Chaitanya. He is a great acharya who was given a new name. Yes. So the new names get given, but the new name isn't the essence of it, right? The new name isn't. It's a cool thing, but it can also happen separate to the initiation, right? It is always given. Don't get me wrong. I don't think there's been a time in our history of people get initiated without getting a new name, but that's not the essential heart of it, right? Mercy of the devotees, again, mercy of the devotees is important, but we receive the mercy of the devotees prior to initiation, or at least I would hope we are receiving the mercy of the devotee prior to our initiation, right? More responsibility, same thing. These are all things that do come with initiation. I'm not trying to imply that these are unnecessary details, let's remove them. These are all important and good details, but they are not essential details. The essence of the initiation is the connection to parampara, which is a connection to Krishna, right? This is the essence of it, right? When one has received that, there was, and that's what defines the initiation. So I remember my spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada had asked him to initiate some devotees, which Srila Prabhupada was starting to do. If I remember correctly, he also asked Jayapataka Maharaj to do the same, and a few other of his senior disciples. Towards the end of his pastime, Srila Prabhupada said, I don't want to be taking disciples anymore. Don't even initiate on my behalf. You just initiate them, right? So that's what, and then Guru Maharaj, he felt uncomfortable to do so. So Guru Maharaj, he pushed Srila Prabhupada back, and then he said, you know, I'll chant on the beads and everything, but please you take them. Anyway, so Srila Prabhupada said, okay. And then Guru Maharaj, he went and he did that, right? And then Guru Maharaj, he came back and Srila Prabhupada, he said the same thing. And then Guru Maharaj again felt uncomfortable. And then I think again, Srila Prabhupada allowed it. And then the third time, Srila Prabhupada said, no, you just initiate them. And then Guru Maharaj, he started initiating, right? So with that, afterwards, Guru Maharaj, he was speaking to a senior Vaishnava, and he was asking the question. He said, so whose disciples are they, right? Because I gave them their names. I chanted, oh, that's another one. Chanting on the beads, right? Chanting on Japa Mala. That's another one we often think. I chanted on the Japa Mala. I gave them the new names, right? I spoke all of the different Gayatri mantras and different initiation mantras. I spoke all of them into their ear, right? So whose disciples are there? And that senior Vaishnava, he said, did Srila Prabhupada say he has accepted them as his disciple? And then Guru Maharaj, he said, yes. And then that senior Vaishnava said, then they are all disciples of Srila Prabhupada. Because in the heart of the initiation is to be accepted in the heart of the spiritual master as the disciple. That's it. Then you are connected. So it's a meaningful connection to the parampara. Right? Does this make sense? Now we are connected to the parampara. The rituals are important, and we do rituals. And I'm not speaking down to rituals, but I think in ISKCON today we've sort of overemphasized the ritual in comparison to the essence of it, right? And my initiation, there wasn't a yagya. I didn't swear that I didn't do. All that happened was Guru Maharaj, he was lying in his bed and he put his hand on my head, and then he said, Tosan Krishna Das, and that was my initiation, right? And again, that's a valid initiation, right? Because at that moment, he had expressed that he had accepted me as his disciple. And accepting me as his disciple, I am now connected to the parampara, right? So it's a dynamic thing, the parampara. We will get to more of that now as we delve into the history of the parampara. And then this comes to a point which Mrugank Prabhu very much nicely pointed to, the acceptance of one person as the Diksha Guru. And this is true, right? We only have one initiating Guru. You don't get initiated many times, right? You get initiated once. If you ever do get reinitiated, that means the first initiation for some reason was not valid, right? That's the only time. It's a bit like a, no, that's too complex an analogy. So yeah, this is the nature of the Diksha Guru. However, we should also remember that Guru is a complex thing. We all have many Gurus in our life, right? And this is another issue we have when in ISKCON we overemphasize the ritual, right? We say, this is my initiating Guru and everyone else can go away is almost our attitude, right? Or my Diksha Guru, he is the most important, and we don't acknowledge any of that. Shivaram Maharaj, he says, one of the prerequisites for initiation is if a devotee realizes that the central Guru in their life is the devotee who's directly guiding them, right? Because most likely it's not him. So he always makes sure that that's clarified, right? Because how have we defined the parampara, the passing down of that knowledge, right? How have we defined it? It's the passing down of Krishna consciousness. It's not even the passing down of knowledge. It's the passing down of Krishna consciousness itself. It's a transcendental knowledge. It's a passing down of that love of Krishna, right? So whenever one is being guided, right? Whenever one is being instructed, and whenever anyone has faith in that person is also the Guru, because all Gurus are one. Guru is not, and we will touch more on this later as it gets into more complex philosophy about Balaram and stuff like that, right? But the Guru is one general principle of reality, right? And it's manifested through different people. Different people will embody the Guru, but it's one principle. So yes, it's the acceptance of one Guru, but we are all accepting one Guru, right? But that one Guru is appearing differently. Okay, so I just wanted to emphasize that point. Initiation is when the spiritual master has accepted the disciple in his heart, and the disciple too has accepted the spiritual master. Okay, let me see if I can erase that. Okay, we'll keep on going then. So now, back to mouse. So now we're going to go through the parampara a bit. Please get ready to annotate a tidbit. Now we will start now with the beginning. As Srinivas Prabhu mentioned earlier, we are in the Brahma Madhva Gaudiya Sampradaya, right? As we said, a Sampradaya is like a lineage of paramparas, if you will. It's a family. It's a specific school, right? And so our one is named after three very special links, right? Brahma, Madhva, and Gaudiya. And that's how I'm going to separate them as we go through them and study them today. So we begin with Brahma, right? And we know how this goes, right? Brahma, he is born, he is the demiurge, right? The maker of this world, but not the creator of it, right? Krishna, he creates the world, but Brahma, he assembles it, he makes it. Brahma is the demiurgical figure. So at the beginning, when he's born, we all know what happens, right? There's pure darkness around him, and all he hears are the two syllables, ta and pa, right? And so because he hears those syllables, he knows now is the time for austerity. And he performs austerity, and then we find he performs the austerity and he qualifies himself to hear the Srimad Bhagavatam, right? And then Krishna, he appears and he speaks transcendental knowledge to him. And because of that transcendental knowledge, he's then able to assemble the universe, right? Under the instruction and guidance of Krishna. Then Brahma goes to Narad Muni, right? And Narad Muni, this is described in second canto of Bhagavatam as well. Narad Muni, he glorifies his father because Narad Muni, he appears as the son of Brahma, right? And he glorifies his father. And he says all sorts of things. And then he receives from him the knowledge of the Bhagavatam, right? He also receives that knowledge. And then we know Vyasadeva, right? So Narad Muni in the second canto, he's sort of badgering Brahma to speak this knowledge. And then this gets passed on to Narad Muni. And Vyasadeva, we know the whole Bhagavatam is written because Vyasadeva, he writes all of the Shastras, right? He's assembled all of them, but he's still depressed, he's still upset, right? And then his spiritual master, his guru, Narad Muni, appears to him. And what does he say? We all know the pastime, famous pastime, right? He says, you're depressed because you have not recorded this, the highest conclusion. And what is the highest conclusion? The beautiful dance of Krishna, the beautiful qualities of Krishna, right? And because of that, Vyasadeva, he enters into trance, and under the guidance of his spiritual master, he understands this knowledge. So this is how we find the Parampara stuff. This section is relatively straightforward, right? Nothing too complex here. The next section, this is going to be, I think, the most complicated one, okay? So this is now the Madhva section, right? Because we find Madhvacharya. Here's a photo of Madhvacharya. Who knows why he has two fingers up? Does anyone know?
Dvaita?
Yes, because Madhvacharya so much rejected Mayavad philosophy. He would hold up his two fingers. He's painted holding up his two fingers here. There is not one thing, there are two things. So he's got his fingers up like that. So we find here Madhvacharya, he's got his two fingers up, and this is, and then of course Hanuman and Vayu, there's all these sort of resonances we find. So Madhvacharya is here. Now here's an interesting point, right? Because some people, you will find some propaganda online on the internet where people will say, oh, well, this idea that a Shiksha Parampara is there, this is just nonsense. This is just made up. This is just speculation, right? But who knows who Madhvacharya's initiating guru was? I can't remember, but he was a Mayavadi, right? So he gave him initiation, but we draw the line from Madhva to Vyasadeva. So do the followers of Madhvacharya. So this isn't some new speculation. This is a Shiksha connection, right? So then Madhvacharya comes, and maybe some of you know, maybe some of you don't know, Madhvacharya, he wrote all these commentaries and he presents them to Vyasadeva, right? And Vyasadeva says, very, very good. And in this way, he gets connected to the Parampara, right? So here we have Madhvacharya. Madhvacharya, who we also know as Ananda Tirtha, right? So Madhvacharya, then we have the next few disciples, and I always forget if it's up. I think it's up to Akshobhya. Another example, most historians agree Madhvacharya initiated Padmanabha Tirtha, Nrihari Tirtha, Madhva Tirtha, and Akshobhya Tirtha. Most scholars agree that he initiated all of them. Could we give rough dates? Okay. So that's a good point. The previous slide is happening in prehistory, right? So Krishna is speaking to Brahma at the creation of this universe. A similar thing with Brahma and Narad. The thing with Vyasadeva is 5,000 years ago. So that's when we're entering into like not prehistorical, right? This is 5,000 years ago, Narad to Vyasadeva. Then Vyasadeva to Madhvacharya, this happens, there's a few thousand year gap. And Madhva, this is now in the 1200s, I think, off the top of my head. Maybe somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. So in that ballpark of the 1200s. Now, in the 1200s, we have these direct connections. So most people would agree. So you can write this, that Madhva Acharya, he initiated the next few, right? Some argue, maybe on one side, you can draw the connection here that he's initiated these. Some will argue that Madhvacharya initiated Padmanabha Tirtha, and Padmanabha Tirtha then initiated the next few, right? Either way, these aren't a line of initiations, right? This is a line of shiksha, because one after the other, right? Because they're all, at least these few, share one same initiating guru. Does this make sense? So this shiksha principle, yeah, exactly. So our line starts with a Mayavad initiate. So that's the whole idea, that initiation is important, but shiksha rules over everything else, because Madhvacharya in no universe was a Mayavadi, as we know by the two, right? He's iconic for being the strongest rejecter of impersonalism. Even the other Vaishnava schools are more accommodating to it. I mean, we are more accommodating to impersonalism than Madhvacharya is. So like this, we find the shiksha line, it's there from the beginning. So people who say, oh, it's not there, well, what to do, right? Just hodeya, right? Now, there's another issue that comes up, because this line that we have here is different than the line that is often given by followers of Madhvacharya. So for a long while, scholars would say, oh, well, the Gauriya Vaishnavas, they just made it up. They just took a random, they got one list of names, they just threw in some other random names, and they made up their parampara, right? And so what they'll say is Baladev Vidyabhushan did this, because Baladev Vidyabhushan, he was trained in the line of Madhvacharya, the Tattvavadis, right? He was trained in this line. So they thought, oh, he's just over attached to his line. And so he wanted to connect his new community to his old line. And so he came up with a random list of names because he didn't know them too well, right? This was the idea that was pushed around. But after a while, what some scholars found is they found that not every single Madhva line is the same. There was some new, there was not a schism, but when the Madhva Sampradaya grew, they had to create new monasteries, right? New mutts. So when they created new mutts, the lines would split because one would send one of his disciples to take care of that mutt, right? So then they would have a different disciplic succession. Does this make sense? Sort of like how if you go to all the different centers, all the different Gauriya mutts, all of their lines will agree up until Bhakti Siddhanta, and then they'll all have different lines. It's not that they reject all the other lines, but simply that their lines are drawn out differently. Does this make sense? I hope I haven't confused anyone. We're all tracking so far, right? So what they found was that, so if our line is based on a lesser known line, but still an accepted established line, right? So that's why you'll sometimes find some differences. Now, I want you to underline Jnana Sindhu and Daya Nidhi. Jnana Sindhu and Daya Nidhi, both of them, they're not present in the Madhva lines. This is fine. There's sometimes we've just filled out some things, but the actual line still agrees. Others will do Jayatirtha straight up to, they write Vidyadhiraj. So that's why I've written Vidyadhiraj. That's what the Madhva lines will call, right? So these are the second names. So they will normally skip from Jayatirtha straight there. But we have these names here, right? So there's not a huge difference. The only real difference we have with the Madhva lines is we fill in 2 extra names, right? But that's not a substantial difference, right? This is pretty standard stuff. So when I've included the dash after the name, this is an alternate name, because sometimes they'll say, oh, there's no Jaya Dharma in the line you're talking about, but there is Jayadhvaj. And it's rather commonly accepted that these are the same personality, as we can see from their names being rather similar. And this isn't just Gauriya Vaishnavas who say this. Academic scholars argue for the same thing. So now we have our parampara. It goes on like this, and it goes on pretty steadily. They're teaching the philosophy of Madhva Acharya, right? Now, I want to point something out. You might notice who is next in our line. It is Brahma, Madhva, and then Gauriya, right? Who does Gauriya relate to? Who can tell me? Can anyone tell me, who does Gauriya relate to?
Is it Chaitanya Mahaprabhu?
Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Exactly, right? So Gauriya relates to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But if you check your disciplic successions open up in front of you, is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu after Lakshmipati Tirtha? No, right? Who is after Lakshmipati Tirtha?
Mahavendra Puri.
Madhavendra Puri.
Madhavendra Puri, right? So I personally like to split. I will put the split of our line softly at Madhavendra Puri and then strictly at Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But I've split it up this way, and I'll explain why when I get onto the next slide. Now, all of the lines agree, but most of them, I think it's Lakshmipati Tirtha. They won't list Lakshmipati Tirtha. That is fine, because at this point, now we're going into Lakshmipati Tirtha. This line only lists the people who are in charge of the monastery, right? Of the mutt. So my personal theory about why we have Jnana Sindhu and Daya Nidhi is they maybe weren't acharyas in the mutt, but they still initiated one after the other, and then maybe the great grand disciple of Jayatirtha became in charge. But I could be wrong. That's just my personal theory about why we have these two extra names, right? So Lakshmipati Tirtha, this is now when we start to break into our line. Madhva, the Madhva followers of Madhvacharya don't list him, right? So we can maybe write a line there at 19. This is now where we have a slight split, right? This is where we start going into our line. And then now let us go to Gauriya Sampradaya, right? So here we find Madhavendra Puri is mentioned. Now, Madhavendra Puri, does anyone know why I would start with Madhavendra Puri rather than Chaitanya Mahaprabhu?
Is it because he was carrying the mood of separation from Krishna even before Mahaprabhu gave it to the
Yes, exactly, right? It is described in Chaitanya Charitamrita that Madhavendra Puri was like the John the Baptist, if you will, of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Madhavendra Puri was sent to have the seeds of devotion, which would fully flourish in the fruit of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Madhavendra Puri planted the seeds which came in the ripe mango, right, of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Gaur Govinda Maharaj, he says that that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is like a mango. As Krishna, because he's dark, it's like a darker, greener mango. Krishna is like the green mango. It's not very juicy. It's very hard to access the nectar, right? But Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when Krishna becomes golden, he's like a mango. When the mango becomes golden, all the nectar is just pouring out constantly. So in the same way, we can say this very ripe fruit of Godhead, all of the necessary items for this to arise came up with Madhavendra Puri. Okay, so Madhavendra Puri, he is the one who really begins the mood of our line. And this will explain a point, because sometimes people will say, oh, you Gauriyas, you say you're connected to Madhvacharya, but your philosophy is relatively different, right? It's similar, but it's different, right? And we also accept this. We are saying that Madhavendra Puri brought something special, which Chaitanya Mahaprabhu fully then tasted, right? So Madhavendra Puri, it said that he was reciting this one shlok, this one text, and it said that only 3 people know what this text means, right? It's a shlok that he would speak in the mood of separation, right? He'll be praying, he's praying, and these are the words that Radharani herself speaks. And when Madhavendra Puri, he would recite it and he would cry and cry like this, right? And Chaitanya Charitamrita describes that there are only 3 people who understand this shloka: Srimati Radharani, Madhavendra Puri, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. There is no 4th person. So here we find what a unique position, right? One of the only people to fully have understood Srimati Radharani. Why does he have this knowledge? Because he is preparing the world for the coming of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He is preparing a parampara, a line for Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to join. Does this make sense? So because of this, I like to say that the Gauriya section, it begins with Madhavendra Puri, but technically it begins with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Okay, and as we know, Ishwar Puri, he is the spiritual master of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Another point, the Parampara system is so great. What do we discuss? Whatever a great person does, everyone follows. Whatever Krishna does, everyone will naturally follow. So Krishna, he takes spiritual master because of that, as does Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, even more than that, he takes initiation because he's experiencing the experience of the devotee. And the experience of the devotee is one that receives initiation. Now, some of you might wonder, why are these personalities in brackets, right? Maybe you're not wondering that. I'll come to that later. Okay, so maybe I'll go on to the next slide. Yes, I have some extra details here. So then we have Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, okay? I hope we're all holding on. I know it's a lot of history, but I wanted to get through the whole parampara so we get a feeling of the flow of the parampara at least. So now this has been introduced. So we have the splits. Then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu comes, right? And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who does he enlist? Who is the our Sampradaya Acharya, if you want to say? Who are we all following? We are all following Rupa Goswami. That is why another name for the Gauriya Vaishnavas is the Rupanugas, those who are following in the footsteps of Rupa Goswami or Rupa Manjari. So Rupa Goswami, he is the one, and that's why we say, Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Sva Padantikam. Shri Rupa Goswami, he understood the heart of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam, right? He has understood Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's heart, and therefore he is in charge of our line, right? Again, all these people saying Shiksha is not present there, we glorify Rupa Goswami not because he received initiation from Mahaprabhu, none of that, but because he understood the message, what Mahaprabhu was giving, right? And therefore we study Rupa Goswami's works in Bhakti-śāstrī. What do we study? Bhagavad-gītā, Ishopanishad, and then we study 2 books by Rupa Goswami, right? If we understand, because if Rupa Goswami understands the heart of Mahaprabhu, if we understand the heart of Rupa Goswami, then we understand the heart of Mahaprabhu, right? Then we're all set. This is parampara, right? So Rupa Goswami, he is listed here. He is very important. Also Swarupa and Sanatan, they are mentioned alongside him. Again, interesting, Sanatan Goswami, he is mentioned. He never initiated any disciples, right? Now, of course, this is explicitly the Shiksha Parampara. This is now very unique. This is not somebody else's line. So we can't use this as evidence anymore for there being a Shiksha Parampara. This is now our line, as was innovated by Bhakti Siddhanta. The line before is an old line, which also shows Shiksha, but this is now our line from Chaitanya onwards. Okay? Okay, hold on, we're nearly there at the end. So, and then next we have Raghunath Das Goswami, who was not initiated by Rupa Goswami, and yet he's listed as the next link, right? And then we also have Jiva Goswami, who never initiated. Jiva Goswami, he was initiated by Rupa Goswami, if you want to take note of that. Then now it breaks down even more. We have Krishnadas Kaviraj Thakur, right? Then we have Narottam Das Thakur. Narottam Das Thakur is not a disciple of Krishnadas Kaviraj Thakur. He's a disciple of Lokanath Goswami. That's why every morning, what do we sing? Shri Guru Charana Padma, right? And then what do we sing? Lokanath, Lokera Jivan, right? We sing that, don't we? Who can tell me, what does it mean? Lokanath, Lokera Jivan. How do we normally translate it as?
He's the master of all the planets or something?
Yes. So we say Lokanath, you are the master of all the universes, right? But actually, when Narottam Das Thakur wrote this bhajan, he actually meant Lokanath Goswami, my spiritual master. And then he was glorifying him. But we sort of take the specific instance and then generalize it, which is fine. But just a bit of trivia for you. When we sing it in the morning, that Lokanath was intended to refer to Lokanath Goswami. And then, of course, when all the other devotees sang it, we just then use it as a general glorification. And then, of course, now we have all of these links that we've already discussed. I won't get into the details too much. In the brackets, I've listed their spiritual master, right? Then we come to Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Gaur Kishore Das Babaji, and then now we are here. We are all under Srila Prabhupada. I have a few more comments to make, but are there any questions? Oh, yes. So yes, exactly. Mrugank Prabhu, I'm not sure if you can see in the group, he's asked the question. These links are a succession of prominent Vaishnavas who upheld the philosophy rather than those who whispered in whose ear. Absolutely. And not only is that in the way we draw the parampara, but in fact, you can argue that that's the same also about the Madhva line, right? Because as I pointed out, the Madhva line begins with Shiksha links. Shiksha, of course, meaning guidance, right? Not Diksha links, right? So it's not who whispered the initiation mantra into whose ears. And sometimes it's not even that, right? It's not that all of them are gaps, right? Some of them did know each other. Bhaktivinoda Thakur knew Jagannath Das Goswami. Gaur Kishore Das Babaji knew Bhaktivinoda Thakur, but they did not get initiated by, Bhaktivinoda Thakur did not initiate Gaur Kishore Das Babaji. And yes, they're prominent, these are the prominent Vaishnavas who are carrying on the dynamic Bhagavad Parampara. If you were to draw out the line, this is the biggest, it's almost like a crisscross. If we drew out all the Diksha lines of all of them, none of them are in the same Diksha line, basically. So it would be like a big zigzag going through, but it's taking prominent acharyas who rejuvenated the philosophy. I would, not to make it, how do I put it? Not to speak too lightly of the heavy topic, but it's almost like a greatest hits sort of album. If that makes sense. Like it's not that nothing else was there, right? But it's pointing out these really prominent personalities. However, that's not to say that just because somebody's not in this list, they weren't a great acharya and they didn't do anything to rejuvenate the line, right? I can think of several acharyas who are as elevated as these acharyas who are not put in the list, right? Trying to remember the name. There's one in particular I'm trying to think of. Bhakti Vikash Maharaj wrote his biography. If I remember, I'll say, but there's very prominent personalities. Who is the sannyasi at the back? At the back where? Oh, in the photo with Srila Prabhupada. That's Kirtanananda Maharaj. Yeah. Yeah. So, what was I saying? Yeah, so, and there's other personalities as well. Like, as I said, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he describes many Babajis who he said were fully qualified, right? Who were on the highest platform. So it's not that because we don't find somebody that they're not great. This is just sort of the general dynamic flow throughout history, right? Of the parampara. So that's the flow of the parampara. A lot of history. I cut down a lot of history as well. We could have gone a little more into detail. Now, to answer the question that it could be asked, the question that could be asked is why are there some people in the brackets, right? Because you'll also find them in your parampara lists in your books. The reason why they're in brackets is they're just listed alongside these personalities in the bhajan. So because they're not listed as one after the other, so they just sort of get inserted on the side, that's all. So if you see the bhajan, actually, I might just show it to you guys. You'll see that they're mentioned there. Okay, can you see my screen? So you'll see here, you'll see here that they get listed alongside each other in text here. So we find Rupa Goswami and then Sanatana Goswami and Rupa Goswami, they're all described alongside him, right? They were all givers of great happiness. So that's just why sometimes they get listed bracketed next to each other, because they didn't get presented as disciples of each other, right? When they're not listed as a disciple or somebody following the mood, then they're listed in bracket. Jagannath Das Babaji, for some reason, I still have no idea why Jagannath Das Babaji is in the line. Okay, so it's 11:51. I thought Parampara would extend throughout the entirety of today, but it hasn't. So I think we'll start discussing now the remaining texts, and then we will conclude, unless anyone else has any other questions to go through regarding Parampara, because I'm going to move on now from Parampara.
One question I want to ask.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm not quite sure how relative it is to this particular Parampara system.
Yeah.
When we look at the Diksha, Siksha, most of our Parampara is coming under the Siksha lineage.
Yeah.
So how do we understand the importance of taking Diksha? First part of the question. And is this okay to continue under Siksha lineage? Because often, even Prabhupada mentioned a few times that the importance of taking Diksha. At the same time, it is proven that our Parampara or lineage is coming under the Siksha lineage. So how do we understand those?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So it's interesting, because even though everyone we are tracing the line through Shiksha, all of them did take Diksha, right? And just because I know sometimes people get caught up in Shiksha, Diksha, because they sound quickly, I'll just clarify again for everyone. Shiksha is the instruction and Diksha is the actual ritual of the initiation. But all of them did take Diksha, right? And what is the nature of the Shiksha? The Shiksha that they're receiving, the guidance that they're receiving, is that they should take Diksha, right? So Shiksha is important, but part of Shiksha is that you should take Diksha, right? Does that make sense? So that's like the one thing. That's why it's still important. Shiksha is the key point, but it's sort of like people will say, oh, all I need to do is chant. You'll often find like some in ISKCON we have a bit of an issue with kirtan culture. There's some real sahajiya stuff going on among kirtaniyas today in ISKCON, unfortunately. And you'll often hear they'll say, oh, just got to chant, and that's true. That's true. But what's part of chanting, right? We have the 10 offenses to the holy name. And one of the offenses of the holy name is to not observe the instruction of the spiritual master. And what is the instruction of the spiritual master? It's that you follow the regulative principles. It's that you study Srimad Bhagavatam and then you chant in light of that, right? So yes, it's true that the essence is chanting, but that entails a lot. It's sort of like our acharyas say, when you give somebody a cooking recipe to cook rice, you only tell people you just need the grains of rice, right? But when they hear that, they know that also means they know I need to bring a few pots in order to boil the rice in, right? The essence of cooking the rice is the rice grain, but you'll bring some pots as well. There's stuff that's implied in a statement. And so we find the same thing, right? Shiksha is the absolute consideration, but Diksha is also still important based on that Shiksha, if that makes sense. So everyone did take initiation, and initiation is important. And what we mean by Diksha also changes, right? Traditionally, when you said Diksha, it just meant second initiation. What we call second initiation used to be the only initiation. Even in the time of Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, they didn't call first initiation. They called it Namdan or something, right? So what was I saying? So what initiation means is also a little bit complex, right? But the importance of it is we need those mantras in order to perform deity worship and all. That's basically it, right? And deity worship needs to be performed. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you, Prabhupada.
Yeah, so it is important, it is useful, if we mean Diksha in terms of receiving the mantras, but that's not even essential. You can go back to Godhead with just first initiation. But that aspect of being accepted by the spiritual master, that is the essential part, right? And that can technically be done without the formality, but the formality is considered part of is part of that message, right? You want to formalize that connection. Rohan Prabhu, you've raised your hand.
I think I just want your opinion. Like, we can see that in our parampara, eventually we went more into like the Bengali culture. do you think in the future, like there will be like English bhajans, Russian bhajans, and do you think they'll still have like that potency?
Yeah, that's a huge question, right?
Yeah.
But I think there's two things at play. There's theoretically there's no reason why not, right? Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, he would say that I'm just trying to remember the quote. Okay, I'm just going to paraphrase because I can't remember the exact quote, but he said something roughly along the lines of the potency of Shastra isn't what language it's written in, it's that it's come from the mouth of the Bhagavat, right? The Mahabhagavat, the great sadhu. So like that's I remember one devotee once said, oh, I read Prabhupada's books in Hindi, right? Because Hindi is closer to Sanskrit and I'm getting a better experience, right? Which is the completely wrong mindset, right? If you can read English, you want to read Prabhupada's books in English because those are the words that he himself spoke, right? The value is that they come from the great saint, right? Not what language they're in, right? If it's Bengali, Hindi, English, Russian, Turkish, whatever, right? I forgot who was making this point, but someone once said the whole English language became beautified when Srila Prabhupada used it to preach Krishna consciousness, right? Suddenly now English has become, if you will, a sacred language, right? Srila Prabhupada has made it sacred by touching it with Krishna Katha, right? So theoretically, there's no reason why not. That being said, there's two aspects. One is that while there might be some that arise and then we could sing, right? Like we even do this, right? We speak out the poetry that Prabhupada wrote in English and that Bhaktivinoda Thakur wrote in English, and we don't translate it into Bengali or something, right? But on the other hand, it's not that I'm not a fan of translating the Bengali into English and then singing that, right? Because again, for that same principle, those words have value because we've received them from the great saints, right? There's the analogy that's used of thunder. We do not need to understand the language of thunder in order to appreciate the potency of it. And it's the same with the words and songs of the acharyas, right? Even if you don't understand a word of Bengali, right? There's still a lot of potency in the Bengali bhajans and in the Sanskrit ones, and then also in the English ones, even if you don't understand English, right? Of course, translations are good to understand the philosophy, but yeah. So I don't think it makes much sense. I don't think it's particularly good to translate what's already in Bengali into English. I think those should stay, but I don't see any issue with singing in English, right? There's also the example that's used, Dhanurdhar Maharaj gives. Somebody once asked a really senior, very conservative Babaji, asked him the question, can I cook pizzas for Krishna when I offer to Krishna, right? And this is a very conservative Babaji. And so he was expecting the response, no, you can't cook pizzas, right? You have to cook puris or something, right? That was the response he was expecting. But even this very conservative Babaji, he said, Krishna does not eat the pizza or the puri. He eats the devotion that you've put into it. If you feel when you make a pizza that you feel more enthusiastic and you feel like you've made something nicer for Krishna and therefore more love flows from you because of it, then make the pizza, right? So what matters isn't it doesn't matter the form. So if somebody feels more comfortable glorifying Krishna in English or in Russian or in Hindi or in Urdu or in Spanish or in whatever, right? Then that's the best thing. But yeah, I don't think we should translate what's already done in English and what's already done in Bengali or English or Hindi or whatever and translate it into English, if that makes sense, right?
Amazing, thank you.
Yeah. Because yeah, we do have this Bengali tinge, not tinge, that makes it seem like it's a bad thing. We do have this Bengali aspect, but it's not particularly necessary. That's why when you go to South India, right? ISKCON is, when you see the South Indian ISKCON temples, they're constructed in a South Indian architectural style, right? It's not that we're, even though sometimes our line gets called Bengali Vaishnavism, we're not Bengali Vaishnavas, right? We're Chaitanya Vaishnavas or we're Gauriya Vaishnavas, right? And I already discussed before how Gauriya doesn't necessarily have to be a geographical description. Okay, Nicole and Alex have asked a question. Can one person hold multiple dikshas and shikshas simultaneously? So no, yes, with shiksha, we are all surrounded with so many shiksha relationships, right? So for me personally, like I take shiksha from several devotees, right? And often they'll delegate to each other. I remember once I asked a question to one of my shiksha gurus, and he said, go ask. So I take guidance from Padmanabhan Prabhu and Ganesham Prabhu, right? So anyone you take guidance from, they are giving you shiksha, right? So I asked Padmanabhan Prabhu once. I asked him a question. He said, go ask Ganesham Prabhu. So then I asked Ganesham Prabhu, and he said, go ask Padmanabhan Prabhu. So I was sent in a circle, right? But yeah, everyone has multiple shiksha gurus, right? Like we are all receiving so much guidance and instruction from so many people, and in so many different ways from so many different devotees. So shiksha inherently is a big, you'll have many sources of shiksha. And ideally, your Diksha Guru is also one of your Shiksha Gurus. Maybe not your primary Shiksha Guru, but it still also will be giving you some Shiksha. But again, there's that principle, the Guru is one. Multiple Dikshas, no, you only take Diksha once. Some people are reinitiated, but again, that's sort of like, it's more like an absolvement, right? Like there's a recognition that the initial Diksha was not proper, right? The initial Diksha was not done appropriately. That's all that's done. But yeah, no, Diksha you only ever take once. Yeah, and you'll only ever have one Diksha Guru. Does that answer that question, or was there any further questions? Okay, we've hit 12 o'clock. Are there any more questions? Okay, I think if there's no, oh yeah.
Sorry, Prabhu, there's a question around like, in terms of how do you select a Diksha Guru then? Like given nowadays, it's you have already said, our line is predominantly based on Shiksha, and it's the Shiksha, the instructions come from Shiksha is to take Diksha. But when it comes, they're not very clear instructions. How do we select a Guru, or especially with now, everything is remote and it's pretty much YouTube based relationships mostly. Like if it's you can't find them on YouTube, it's difficult to sort of connect or even find. And even then, what are we looking for? Like typically what is said is, Diksha Guru is the one who will take responsibility that you will go to Krishna.
Yeah.
I get that, like traditionally where you'll be going to a guru may be judging you that you are qualified, or and you are also making sure that you don't have even a shred of doubt that this guru has the fully sort of it's in where he can sort of connect you to Krishna, and you can follow him in whatever he says, that you don't have that. But remotely sort of selecting, it's either you like someone how they sing, but is that enough? Either if someone gives a lecture and then you take it, like, is that enough? How do you have the connection from the heart? Like that's the key part, which like at personal level we are struggling.
Yes, this is the best question you can ask. This is a very important one. I think it's something everyone goes through. Just quickly before I answer it, just in case people want to, not in case people want to leave, but just before people start dropping off, the homework is read text 1 to 16 from chapter 5, please. I think you've all finished chapter 4, right? I told you all to finish chapter 4, right? I always forget the readings I said, but yeah, I told you just finish chapter 4. I don't forget them, but I second guess myself. Yeah, so please read the first 16 texts of chapter 5. Okay, so to answer that question, yeah, it's a long, you can give long answers. I'll send you personally one YouTube video. It's a class that was given by His Grace Madhavananda Prabhu, where he goes through this whole topic in lots of depth. It's like a 3-hour class, and he goes through everything, and it's really, it's the best in my opinion. I send it to everyone. Anyone who's ever talked to me about this, they'll know I get even annoying. I keep on telling, I'll send it multiple times until you watch it. But it's really good. But the central point is, yes, as you said, there's a few aspects I'll touch on, and then I'll just send you that class. firstly, coming into contact, that's the beauty of the ISKCON system. And that's the one real wonderful thing we have. We have such a large variety of, like, the whole traveling system and everything. You know, we have so many great devotees who are traveling around, so we can come into contact with many of them, right? So it's been difficult the past 2 years, right? But definitely now there's so much opportunity to meet so many people, right? How many great and senior devotees are visiting all the time? So that's one thing. When you're in ISKCON, the real benefit that ISKCON has, as compared to almost anyone else, is that we really do in my opinion, do a good job of facilitating coming into contact with senior and advanced devotees, right? That's not to say that, you know, you can just, so there's that. But in terms of access, right? Not to say that there's anything wrong with listening to YouTube to see who you resonate with, so on and so forth, right? There's nothing wrong with that either, but we also want some physical association. More so, coming to your saying point, yeah, it's absolutely true. It's not enough, like, to say, even that I like their classes, right? Sometimes people think, oh, it's not their kirtan, it's their classes that grabs me. Even that's not really enough. There's two aspects to it. There are some things you have to look for, but it also is one thing where it just gets revealed to you. And that's the worst answer. Everyone hates it whenever you say that. But when you know, it's one of those sort of things. Like at one point you just know, right? And that's a really annoying answer that I remember hating it, but it is the ultimate answer. However, yeah, singing classes, it's none of that. It's when I hear from this person, are they giving me Krishna, right? Do I have the faith that when this person speaks, I am hearing the message of Krishna? When this person speaks, do I hear Krishna Katha? Not in the sense that they're a good speaker, but are they genuinely giving Krishna to me? That is the one and only criteria of a spiritual master. Everything else is a secondary question, right? That's the question. When this person speaks, do I hear the words of Krishna? Is this somebody who knows Krishna and who can introduce me to him, right? That's the central question. Now, how can I tell that? That's a question of faith. And that's why it becomes one of those when you know sort of thing. But I think it becomes easier when we remember two things. One is that we should always remember, am I just impressed because he tells funny jokes? Or I remember Madhavananda Prabhu, he'll give the example. One Mataji, she was explaining, I chose my spiritual master because he's good with children. So my children then can feel encouraged in their Krishna consciousness. That's a sweet thought, but that's not exactly the criteria, right? It's very clear in Shastra, right? The qualification of the guru is that they know Krishna, right? So is this somebody who knows Krishna? And it's very hard for us to see, right? So rather than, how do I put it? Rather than having a checklist, right? We should make sure we're not looking for the wrong things, but then we should rather pray. Indra Prabhu also gives a wonderful class. We should pray to Krishna. Krishna, we should not pray that we will see the spiritual master. Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he will present this. This is the basis of spiritual life. We are not the person who sees. We are the person who is seen. Our desire is not to see Krishna. It is to be seen by Krishna. And the spiritual master, he represents Krishna. Our desire is not that we will see the spiritual master, that we will find him, because we cannot. We do not have the eyes to see it. Our desire is that somehow the Sadguru will mercifully place his glance upon us, right? And once he has placed his glance upon us, then he will give his mercy, or her mercy, right? Does this make sense? So I find, so there's the two aspects. One, we should still, because no matter what, we're still going to be looking for things. We should make sure we are looking for the right thing, but also we should not carry the mood of we are investigating, right? And I'm not saying you are, I'm just using, exaggerated terms to make the point, right? It's not that we are investigating and we are looking like this. Instead, we should be very eager. It's not that we should be apathetic, but we should be eager that the spiritual master, will reveal himself or herself to us, right? They'll reveal themselves to us. We should have this desire that I will be seen by the Guru, right? And again, that's a very frustrating answer, because we want the checklist and we want to go tick, tick, tick. Okay, boom. Now I'm so and so Das, right? That's what we want. But yeah, what to do is better not to rush it. And not that you're rushing it, So it's better in every means to have hesitancy. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, that's what he says. 1 year at the very least. If you think you know, you should spend 1 year strictly seeing, do I genuinely have faith? And is this genuinely someone I can have faith in, right? There's a 1 year period where the guru tests the disciple and the disciple tests the guru. That's why we have it in ISKCON. You can't get initiated instantly. Sometimes you'll find new devotees. They'll tell you they've been in ISKCON for 2 months and they tell you who their spiritual master is. And it's sort of like, maybe not, right? Like maybe, but maybe not as well, of course, right? So there's that. On the other hand, if you're already receiving shiksha from somebody, right? If you're already under the shelter of somebody in the sense of them giving you shiksha, there's also no need for so much rush. You shouldn't be against getting diksha because it is an important thing to get. But if you're receiving shiksha, you're getting the important stuff, right? Right? I remember one person said, "Oh, I really like this devotee, but he's just my shiksha guru. So I don't know if I want him to be my diksha guru." So actually, if you fully accept them as your shiksha guru, right? So somebody can act as a shiksha guru without you fully accepting them as that, right? That gets a little bit complicated, right? We'll touch on that a little later on. But you shouldn't feel that pressure that I'm in a secondary position because I'm not yet initiated, right? Sometimes people feel that pressure. If you're receiving shiksha, then hari bol, right? That's the main point, right? But still, you should strive for initiation. So yeah, so there's a lot of factors to tie into that. But I think, yeah, really the basic one is that it really is it's one of those, you'll know when you'll know, but you should also know what you're meant to be knowing, right? Because often people will rush in and so it's one thing that you sort of have to figure out, and you also have to figure out individually. That's another thing I want to clarify. People misunderstand the ISKCON guru list. They think the ISKCON guru list means a list of people that I can get initiated from, right? That's not what it means. The ISKCON guru list is a list of devotees who the GBC does not object to people getting initiated by. It's not an endorsement, it's just a no objection, right? So some people also have that, right? This person is on the ISKCON guru list, so can't go wrong. I'm just going to get initiated. I want my initiation. Again, I'm not accusing you of that. I'm just saying these are traps, right? The ISKCON guru list means that the GBC finds no reason why they would object. It doesn't mean that they're saying this is a guru for you. Madhavananda Prabhu, he'll make the joke. We wouldn't let the GBC choose our wives, but we let them choose our spiritual master, right? So we would, yeah. So it's not that they've chosen, this is the list and you can choose, and then you can choose anyone from these and you're fine. It is even harder than that, right? It's even more difficult than that. Yeah, so I think the best way is to keep it in mind, really study what Guru Tattva is. It's a very deep topic. So I really, really study it in Prabhupada's books, what he has had to say about it. Study it and then pray, keep on praying that the spiritual master will reveal himself. Indra Prabhu, he says our pillow should be wet every night, should be soaked every night with the tears that we are crying because Sadhguru has not revealed himself to us. That's what he says. We should be crying. We should be willing to tell Krishna, Krishna, if you do not reveal your representative to me, I will be willing to, there's no point to me even existing anymore. We should have this resolve, right? But then we don't have this resolve, right? So then we should pray to Krishna, oh, Krishna, I don't want the spiritual master that badly, but still, please, you're so merciful. Allow him to reveal himself to me. Yeah, so yeah, often people will want an easier solution, but it's what to do. This is Krishna consciousness is dynamic, and the issue when it's dynamic is that's why the paramparas corrode into ritualism, right? They corrode into ritualism because it's easier to just say these magic words and then boom, it's done, right? This is, if you will, the austerity of following the essence of the line, because we have to try to keep to that essence. Does that help? Okay,
Yes, Prabhuji. Yeah, and
okay.
it's different as well, like between like me and her, like it's a totally different thing. And I think if you have, the more you sort of, I think sometimes your intellect works against you. If you have come from various different backgrounds, like I have from, and it's becoming very difficult then to to select a guru, as you said, not being investigative, but your intellect does come into the way when it comes to select, finding the right guru.
Yeah, and it should be there, but it's not the guiding principle. That's why they say there's the 1 year testing period, right? The 1 year testing period, that's what it's for. That's when you are engaging it and you're thinking, there's scrutiny. It's not that we want blind cult-like faith. So I'm not saying that the intellect is something that gets thrown out in the process, not at all. The opposite, actually, right? Not just that you run in, but what I'm saying is the guiding principle of it is not that intellect, and it's not the looking out for it. If you feel, oh, now this, Sadhguru has revealed themselves to me, then is the time, okay, is this actually legitimate? That's when the intellect kicks in, right? You get what I mean? So I'm not saying to throw it out. That's another issue. Sometimes people will say, oh, don't question, and then they get roped into something that they don't want, right? So yeah, but yeah, no, it's a complex thing, and there's also so many other factors that we sometimes it's so easy to fall into the trap. I want them to be this old, or I want sannyasi or grihasta, or I want Indian, or I want American, or something like that. But all of these factors are, but it's hard to look past those factors, right?
Prabhu, one of the things that is being told, and I've heard it many times, is that well, we must get the Diksha very quickly, because there are not many gurus left who are directly initiated by Prabhupada, and sort of you must act quickly, and that is kind of builds pressure, not giving me the time and space kind of to let it naturally flow and happen.
Yeah, I with all due respect to any devotee who says that, I strongly disagree in every sense of the word, disagree with that. Is this weird idea, is this really weird idea we have that only Prabhupada disciples are senior devotees. Kadamba Kanana Maharaj, he is not a disciple of Srila Prabhupada. Bhakti Rasamrita Maharaj, he is not a disciple of Srila Prabhupada. And if anyone wants to say they're anything less than great devotees, you can show them the door, So is this very weird idea. We think the parampara dies after Prabhupada's disciples. It's this very weird lack of faith in the parampara. The parampara system is very potent, and it creates, you know what I mean? It creates great devotees, right? And so there shouldn't be this pressure. Gaur Govinda Maharaj, as I said, he said, this material world would not exist if there are no bona fide devotees to guide us. So I really strongly, I hear this often, and I object to it whenever I can, because it's just not correct. We shouldn't rush in. There's nothing, how do I put it? There is something magical about being initiated by a Srila Prabhupada disciple. There's also something magical about being initiated by a disciple of a Srila Prabhupada disciple. It's not that only Prabhupada could create great devotees. If that was true, then our movement will die out very soon. Not only will our movement die out very soon, but the whole philosophy falls apart, right? Some people thought the same thing. People who were joining Krishna, who were coming to Krishna consciousness maybe 2-3 decades ago, back when Prabhupada's godbrothers were still around, some of them had the same idea. They thought, oh, I need to get initiated quickly before, and because otherwise all the disciples of Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur are going to be gone, right? So it's this weird idea that comes in every generation, and in every generation it sort of misses the mark. If we say that we don't have faith that the parampara can create great devotees, and I think that, yeah. So yeah, all that to say is, yeah, I wouldn't listen to those concerns because it doesn't line up with our philosophy. It's good to have the idea that I want to take initiation, but it's not good to rush it because of any other factor than I want to be confirmed under the shelter of a guru I have faith in. And if you don't have a guru you have that faith in, which isn't something rude. It's not rude to say I don't have that faith yet in anyone. It's not disrespectful. Respect and faith are two different things, right? Yeah, if you don't have that, then you shouldn't rush it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, there'll always be devotees. And we know that, why? Because Krishna is everywhere, but Krishna says he cannot exist without his devotees. So if Krishna is everywhere, then his devotees are everywhere. So yeah, no worry. I'll send you that class by Madhavananda Prabhu. It's really, really nectar. He has pastimes and all illustrating all of these points as well.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
And can you send it in the group, Prabhuji?
Okay, I'll send it in the group if
Thank you,
everyone
Prabhuji.
else is interested
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
But if I send it in the group, I'll make sure I'll fail all of you if you don't listen to it. It's my favorite class ever. So
Okay.
okay, yeah. I'll send it in the group then if other people are also
Yeah.
interested. Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay
yeah.
then. Thank you all for turning up. I was hoping to get through more, but Parampara really absorbs me. We're going to do 5th chapter in one day in order to stay on track. Okay. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Vanchakalpatarabhyascha kripasindhubhyeva patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Okay, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Krishna. Thank you. Thank you.